Home Secretary, Chris.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I associate myself with the Deputy Prime Minister's remarks about the tragic air crash in India and, of course, what she said about our dear colleagues Joe Cox and Sir David Amess. I also join her in calling for de-escalation between Israel and Iran, while noting everything possible must be done to stop Iran getting a nuclear weapon. Yesterday, the Leader of the Opposition and I met with survivors and family members of the rape gang scandal. Fiona, Teresa, Lucia and Marlon. They told us how authorities deliberately covered up the systematic rape of young girls and some boys by gangs of predominantly Pakistani heritage men. They covered it up because they cared more about so-called community relations than about protecting vulnerable girls. That is disgusting. The survivors told us they will only have confidence in an inquiry if it is independently led, has full statutory powers, covers all 50 towns affected, including Bradford, if those who covered this up are prosecuted, if foreign perpetrators are all deported, if survivors are closely involved, and if it is set up before the summer recess. Can the Deputy Prime Minister give the survivors and their families those assurances?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, first of all, can I thank him for his tone and putting the survivors and victims at the heart of his question here today. I think it's absolutely right that we all look at what's happened over the last couple of decades, the countless reports that we've had, and we look to implement that. He's absolutely right to also talk about the confidence people must have in that independent inquiry. And the member that my friend, the Shadow Home Secretary, spoke about that earlier this week in regards to Baroness Casey's report. So we will take that forward at speed, Mr. Speaker. It will be independent, it will have statutory powers, and we will implement the J report, which was he will have known about as the Shadow Minister in charge. The Minister in charge at the time, and we'll get on with taking the action. I hope members of his party will take his tone in making sure the whole House put the victims first and we all work together to get to the bottom of it.
Well, I thank the Deputy Prime Minister for her answer. It is vital that scandals like this are never again covered up because of the racial background of perpetrators. And Baroness Casey's report said people who downplay the ethnic dimension are letting victims down, to use her words. So I do have to raise the language the Prime Minister used in January when he, I'm afraid to say, smeared campaigners as jumping on, quotes, a far-right bandwagon, simply for calling for the very inquiry he has now been forced to set up. Standing up for rape victims is not far-right. So will the Deputy Prime Minister apologise for what the Prime Minister said?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, I say, Mr. Speaker, that the Prime Minister did not just raise issues but acted on them. He brought the first prosecutions against grooming gangs, called for action to address ethnicity issues in 2012. And the honourable member will know that the data that the previous government collected was inaccurate and not complete. And Casey recognised this, and it's one of the recommendations that we will be taking forward. The Prime Minister made those comments specifically about Tory ministers who sat for years in the government and did absolutely nothing about this scandal.
Smearing campaigners, standing up for rape victims as far right is completely unacceptable, and the Prime Minister should never have said that. And I commend his predecessor, the member for Richmond, for the grooming gangs task force he set up, which led to 550 arrests in its first year. Now, Baroness Casey's report also said that a significant number of rape gang perpetrators were non-UK nationals or were asylum seekers, many of whom entered the country illegally. And we know, of course, that most illegal immigrants crossing the Channel are young men, contrary to what the Chief Secretary said last week. So does the Deputy Prime Minister now accept that the small boats crisis is a crisis of public safety as well as a border crisis?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, this is a very serious issue and more needs to be done. And let me update the House. Working with our allies, we've carried out a series of major arrests to tackle smuggling gangs behind this vile trade. In the past month, a ringleader that smuggled almost 4,000 migrants has been jailed for 25 years. We could go further thanks to the law enforcement agreements we struck with Germany, Italy, Serbia and the Balkan states. In stark contrast to the honourable gentleman, he was the man at the heart of the Home Office when immigration soared, we lost control of our borders and spent £700 million of taxpayers' money on persuading just 4 volunteers to be removed from Rwanda. I take no lectures.
If she wants to find out who's lost control of our borders, I suggest she looks to her immediate right. Because ever since the Home Secretary scrapped the Rwanda deterrent before it even started, illegal immigration across the Channel has gone up by over 30%. And so far this year, 2025 has been the worst year in history for illegal immigrants crossing the Channel. That is on her watch. That is down to her government. The Prime Minister is now planning crisis talks with President Macron, finally admitting, in his own words, that the situation is deteriorating. The government's laughable plan to smash the gangs lies in tatters. So will she now at last accept we need a removals deterrent so every single illegal immigrant arriving on these shores is immediately removed? Will she commit to that, yes or no?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, if they want to argue that 40,000 arrivals since July 24 are down to the scrapping of the Rwanda scheme, they need to explain why there were more than 43,000 arrivals in the same period starting in July 22 when the Rwanda agreement was in place. It's absolute rubbish, Mr. Speaker. They lost control of our borders. We're getting control of our borders. He needs to apologise.
I don't see how she has the brass neck to claim she's got it under control. When the numbers crossing the Channel this year are the highest in history. She asks about the Rwanda deterrent. I'll repeat, she obviously wasn't listening to what I said earlier. The Rwanda scheme never started. And indeed, illegal immigrants in Calais said they were...
Order! Order! Just do it. I want to hear the question, and I'm sure our constituents want to hear the question and the answer. Crystal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Rwanda scheme never started. Illegal immigrants in Calais were saying before the election how much they wanted the Prime Minister to get elected because he would help them get here. When Australia started a similar scheme about 10 years ago, it worked within a few months. Now, Mr. Speaker, as a consequence of the government losing control, they are now accommodating growing numbers of illegal immigrants, many of whom cross the Channel, in asylum, hotels and flats. The Home Office's suppliers are now actively offering above-market deals to landlords to get hold of their properties to be used for illegal immigrants. In the meantime, hard-pressed young people here are unable to rent or buy. So why is this government prioritising housing for illegal immigrants above housing for our young people?
So again, Mr. Speaker, I gently say to the right honourable member opposite that under their watch, immigration increased fourfold until it reached almost 1 million in a single year. They also created the backlog, 400 hotels, which we've reduced to just over 200 hotels in the first 12 months of us being in government, Mr. Speaker. £1 million a day spiffed up the wall because they were so incompetent. We're building the homes that they failed to deliver over 14 years of consecutive failure by their government. They should apologise while we get on with the job of rebuilding Britain.
Goodness me, she's got a cheek. Housing starts in Q4 last year went down. Her mission to rebuild Britain is not going very well. She talks about asylum hotels. She obviously hasn't looked at the most recent numbers. The number of people in asylum hotels was higher in March this year than it was at the time of the last election. And she gave no answer about the priority being given to illegal immigrants over people living here already. Now, Mr. Speaker, a Zimbabwean paedophile due for deportation was recently allowed to stay in the UK because a court found he might face, quote, some hostility back in Zimbabwe, apparently breaching his Article 3 rights. What about the rights of children here to be protected from this dangerous paedophile? Who's looking out for their rights? Not the government. There are thousands of cases like this involving foreign criminals. So there is a solution. We need to scrap the Human Rights Act for immigration matters so this sovereign parliament decides on the law our courts apply. But her party voted against that. So I have a simple question. Why did the government side with foreign criminals and not the British public?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, again, Mr. Speaker, they had 14 years of failure on these issues. We've also included 4,500 foreign national offenders that have been deported since we came into office, Mr. Speaker, more than they did in the same period. I take no lectures from the Johnny-come-lately who couldn't do anything when he was in office.
Moving on to other notable news, Stephen Dixon from GB News didn't hold back when questioning Minister Emma Reynolds about Keir Starmer's confusing U-turn on the issue of grooming gangs. Although Reynolds insisted that Labour is now treating the issue seriously, many people still clearly remember that Starmer had earlier dismissed calls for a national inquiry, labelling them as far-right. Live on air, Stephen asked directly, why did he politicise this issue earlier in the year, only to now completely reverse his position and admit that those people were actually right? Her response came across as hesitant, vague, and far from convincing, leaving many viewers doubting whether she even believed what she was saying. Watch the clip and decide for yourself. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe, hit like, and share your thoughts in the comment section.
Good morning to you. There's a lot of pressure on the Prime Minister to apologise. Why on earth, on this issue, did he politicise it earlier in the year, saying people who wanted a full national inquiry were jumping on a far-right bandwagon, only to now decide that actually they were right in the first place?
Well, I remember distinctly that at Prime Minister's questions in January, the Prime Minister rightly said that there were different views on both sides of this debate, and actually victims and victims' families had different views too. But what we did in January is that we asked every police force to reopen investigations. We now have over 800 reopened cases. We've ordered the National Crime Agency to follow those up. So the Prime Minister and the government as a whole, our priority all along was to, and it continues to be, to deliver justice for the victims and their families and get to the bottom of what happened.
But how can people believe that you are genuine in wanting to get justice for those young girls and those women, those survivors of those child rape gangs, let's call it what it is, when you've got the likes of Lucy Powell calling it dog whistle politics?
Well, look, we take this issue incredibly seriously. The Prime Minister was Director of Public Prosecutions and he acted 10 years ago in that position on these issues. He was the first to take a prosecution to grooming gangs. We have set out now a proper plan. We've listened to what Baroness Casey, who at the start of her review didn't think there needed to be a national inquiry, but has since uncovered gaps. We have supported the setup of local inquiries. We don't want to rerun what Alexis Jay did for 7 years until 2022. We have already taken forward some of her recommendations. The last government, frankly, did nothing in the time they were in office on the 20 recommendations that she put out in 2022. So we are forging ahead with urgent action here to deliver justice for the victims.
Yes, but you haven't as yet sort of answered any of the questions we've put to you. You've avoided the point, which is, I mean, yes, whatever action's been taken before, great, but there was calls for a national inquiry, and anyone who looked at the evidence that GB News put forward, for example, with the work that our reporter has done, would have said, yeah, it's a very simple answer to this question. There clearly needs to be a national inquiry. This is a huge problem. And you politicised it as a government. You politicised that and said there was no need for it. And now you've changed your mind. That you've got to address that, haven't you?
Well, look, the Prime Minister was talking about Conservative ministers who were politicising this issue, who frankly had sat in government offices for years, sat on the recommendations from the Alexis J report and not taken those forward. He also said, however, that there were strong views and opinions on both sides of this debate as to whether there needed to be a national inquiry. But the one that Louise Casey is calling for is to coordinate local inquiries and to fill the gaps. It is not a rerun of the Alexis J inquiry, because we do not want to wait another 7 years before we take action, which is why we have prioritised taking action, reopening cases, ordering the National Crime Agency to follow up those over 800 cases now reopened since January, since the Home Secretary ordered the police to reopen the cases into grooming. So we are making progress, and we want to make progress as quickly as possible, and that's what is important here. What's important is the victims. The victims have to be at the centre of this inquiry and the centre of this work, and we need to take urgent action, and we already are making progress.
You say you want to get to the bottom of this quickly. You say you don't want it to take another 7 years. How long, then, will this new national inquiry take, and what funding is going to be given to it?
Well, the Home Secretary will make those things clear later on, where she makes a statement when the Baroness Casey report is published later today. So you'll get more clarity on that later today.
How helpful is it when, I mean, we know there is a significant problem which is still existing at the moment. We talk in historic terms, but actually this is an ongoing issue, which is why speed is essential in all of this. Why then does someone like Sadiq Khan, the Labour Mayor of London, when he's asked about grooming gangs in London, say, I don't understand the question?
Well, look, as a government, we take this issue very seriously. The point you make is right. This is about historic grooming gangs inquiries, but it's also to ensure that we look into anything that's current and make sure that we get justice for the victims, but also to protect young girls and protect our children.
Can I ask you about the situation between Iran and Israel? It's intensified over the weekend.
Sure.
What's your reaction to what you've seen?
The government is prioritising de-escalation. We're very concerned about the instability and the situation in the Middle East. We've urged both sides to show restraint, to step back from action. The Prime Minister, as you know, is in Canada and is already talking to G7 leaders. So we want all diplomatic pressure to come to bear on both sides so that we can get them back round the table to have a diplomatic solution to this situation.
Can I ask you about transport? The spending review saw the Department of Transport lose 5% on an annual day-to-day budget basis, so we understand capital investments going up. I know you're announcing today £1 billion which will be spent on renewal of bridges, ruined roads and tunnels, and a new Thames crossing. It doesn't seem like a lot of money. I mean, I know it is, but in real terms, I mean, the pothole experts in this country say it would cost 16 billion just to repair our roads.
Well, on the spending review, in terms of the Department for Transport, one of the reasons for the figures that you've just talked about is that during COVID, there needed to be greater rail subsidy because there were fewer people using the railways. Now that subsidy has reduced significantly because there are more and more people travelling to work than there were obviously during COVID times. The £1 billion structures fund that we are announcing today is in addition to the over £15 billion in city transport deals that we announced a couple of weeks ago, and the over £2 billion for local transport projects. But we're determined to improve our infrastructure, and later this week we are also setting out a 10-year infrastructure plan so that we can take the right long-term decisions to improve transport, to improve infrastructure around the country, because that is absolutely central to kickstarting economic growth and to better growth and jobs around the country.
OK. Emma Reynolds.